Welcome back. We're about 1 hour, 20 minutes, and 11 seconds actually away from the launch of Challenger, the first flight of this space shuttle, STS number 6. I'm Ben Waldman along with Wayne Dolcefino. We're live from the Johnson Space Center. Throughout the morning, we'll be bringing you details of the pre-launch activities and the launch itself at 12:30 today, Houston time. 526-4984 is our number. We invite you to join the conversation with us. We're going to be talking with lots of people this morning. Right now, we're going to be talking with Colonel Jack Lausma. He was the commander for the Space Transportation System Flight number 3, I believe is right, Colonel. Is that right?
That's right. Good morning. Glad to be with you.
Good morning.
Everything's proceeding smoothly.
What about the winds, Colonel? We keep hearing a great deal about the winds aloft being, I suppose, the same kind of wind effect that we've heard about with aircraft, the shear wind effect. Is that what the problem was earlier today?
Yes, that's true. At high altitudes, of course, the wind is very strong, and this affects our guidance system and the trajectory of the space shuttle as it climbs. So we want to make sure that that's within the limits with which the guidance system can tolerate, and certainly they are now, and so they've been erased as a problem.
Now, we understand that the winds are at the same point of which Challenger will go through its maximum dynamic pressure, the maximum pressure and the maximum effect on the spacecraft. And I guess this was one of the big concerns, too, was it not?
That's right. As it goes through the speed of sound around 35,000 feet or so, this is where it reaches its maximum dynamic pressure, and so we would like to make things as benign in that region as we possibly can.
Colonel, what is it like flying this machine? This, of course, the Challenger's the first time. It's in a sense, a brand new spacecraft. I would assume a bit different than Columbia, but the same characteristics are there. Is it easier to fly this than, say, a DC-9?
No, I don't think so. Of course, there are lots of aspects to flying this machine that are different than an airliner, and many which are the same. When it comes back, rather than having the ability to go around again, of course, it's a glider, and we have to make sure it lands. However, it probably responds control-wise more crisply and more quickly than DC-9 does. It doesn't fly like a big, heavy airplane. It's a very crisp, quick response. The Ascent, of course, is like a rocket. It's not like an airplane, and when it goes up, it's a tremendous boost, relentless, powerful, aggressive push all the way into orbit, and lots of dynamic cues, lots of things going on during the boost. It's a very exciting ride, and it lasts for about 8.5 minutes.
Well, this is a much more powerful spacecraft, too. Will they feel the effects, or will they feel the additional power, the astronauts and the crew?
No, I don't think they will. You see, not only is it more powerful, but it also has a heavier payload, so I think all that's going to even out. The solid rocket boosters are lighter, the external tank is lighter, the Challenger itself is about 2,500 pounds lighter than the Columbia was, but all totaled, once the payload and the propellants and everything are added up, the whole space machine is about 2,000 pounds heavier.
CBS News, this is Rob Armstrong. After a 2.5-month delay because of engine problems, the U.S. Space Shuttle Challenger is now ready for its maiden launch. We have the latest in 2 reports, starting with Reed Collins at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Half an hour from now, the 3 main engines of Challenger and the solid strap-on boosters will generate a lifting force of 6.9 million pounds. And the vehicle, which weighs 4.5 million, will leap from the pad like a startled gull. In 7 seconds, it will clear the tower. A minute later, it will be fighting its way up through 42,000 feet, where sheer winds have kept NASA guessing through the night. But the signal is go for launch, with modified engines never really test-fired, a new spacecraft never flown, and only one man up there in the cockpit, P.J. Weitz, who's ever been in space before. This is Reed Collins at the Kennedy Space Center to Judy Muller in Houston.
Mission Control in Houston officially takes over once the Challenger leaves the launch pad in about a half hour, and from that time until the astronauts begin their sleep period at 2:45 a.m. Tuesday morning, all concerned will have plenty to keep them busy. Once the new shuttle is securely locked into orbit, the crew will operate 2 latches to open the large doors on the ship's cargo bay. Inside that bay is the world's biggest and most sophisticated communications satellite, called in NASA jargon the TDRS-1. 10 hours and 1 minute into the flight, Mission Specialist Story Musgrave will command the deployment. to send the 2.5-ton satellite into a stationary orbit over 22,000 miles high. It will be the first of 3 designed to create a new, highly sophisticated communication system between Earth and space. Judy Muller, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
This is an NBC News Hotline Report. I'm Steve Porter in New York. My colleague Jay Barbree is standing by at the launch site at Cape Canaveral, where all is go for today's maiden flight of the Challenger space shuttle. Now, there'd been concern over the weekend that high-altitude winds and a wind shear problem might force a delay in the launch, but conditions appear to have improved not only at the Cape, but at the emergency landing locations dotted around the world. Jay Barbree, who is located just 3 miles from the launch pad, has the best view of the weather and, of course, the last-minute preparations for launch. Jay, how's it going?
Well, right at this moment, Steve, we've just run into a slight problem. We're getting ready to pick up the countdown here at T-minus 9 minutes and go for the liftoff exactly at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. They're holding.
We should be approaching that T-minus 9.
Wait, let's listen to the launch control.
All right.
9-minute point. Approximately 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. T-minus 9 minutes and counting.
Okay, they did give them a go there, Steve. So all is set here for Challenger's engines to be triggered, descended into space in just about 9 minutes. The flight plan calls for a 5-day mission with a crew of 4. The commander is Paul J. Weiss, a veteran of the Skylab project. The other 3 crew members are rookies. The pilot is Carol J. Bobko. The 2 mission specialists are Donald H. Peterson and Dr. Story Musgrave. All 4 are strapped in their shuttle seats, and they are ready for launch. When it comes, the Challenger's 3 main engines will be ignited first, and when the launch team is sure they are burning as they should, an additional 5 million pounds of thrust will erupt from the 2 solid booster rockets strapped to the space plane's fuel tank. It was those solid boosters that we had a question about just moments ago, Steve, but as you heard, the go has been given, and we're now counting down. The shuttle should be off on its first mission, but getting there has been a rocky road. As it has been reported many times, all 3 main engines have had leaks in them. It's been laid 2.5 months. Those leaks have been fixed, of course, and Challenger has had contaminants blown into its cargo bay. Those contaminants have been cleaned out. Everything is ready, and we're now just about 7 minutes and 45 seconds away, Steve, from Challenger's maiden launch.
This is probably as exciting a part of the launch as the tremendous sound that comes from those huge engines right at launch, this anticipation of that incredible sight and sound. Jay, you know, we have reached the operational stage of the shuttle. Well, let's see, we reached it back in the STS-6 flight last fall. Yet here we are 2.5 months late, putting an extremely important piece of equipment into space. This delay is sure to affect the rest of the launch schedule, at least for the rest of this year. Has the delay, do you think, caused undue concern at NASA that we may lose some space business, or do they maybe feel this delay was worthwhile even if we are a little late?
No, it has caused a lot of concern, Steve. In fact, a lot of customers of NASA, they're standing by, they're watching this, and if the Challenger shouldn't get off today, the problem, of course, would be worse. And they're quite worried about it. Their plan right now, if they can get the mission off today, to get the 5 flights in this year, and they need to get them in, because you're not only dealing with commercial cargo here, you're dealing with secret spacecraft that must get up for the Air Force for national security. And we have one of those flights going in October. And also we have an international flight with the first space lab, and that's to come September the 30th. And they need to get the Challenger into orbit, get up these TDRS satellites so that they'll have the TDRS system up. This system will be, of course, to relay constant communications between mission control and shuttle flights. All of this is very necessary. Otherwise, the customers will be looking for new ways of getting their cargo into space.
How's the countdown going right now? We're just about 6 minutes away now from launch.
We're right on it, Steve. 6 minutes and 3 seconds and counting, and everything is moving along fine here.
This TDRS you're talking about, of course, is TDRS, or Tracking and Data Relay Satellite. It will be taken up about 170 miles above the Earth, released into a low orbit, then it will be boosted into a geosynchronous orbit more than 22,000 miles above the Earth. It's a very important piece of equipment to the future of our space program.
40 seconds.
It sure is, Steve. It is the satellite and another one like it that will serve as all the communications between the shuttle flights of the future, eliminating ground tracking stations. We're still counting here at 5 minutes and 25 seconds from liftoff. Everything right on time.
Some of the activities that we expect to occur during the flight include an extravehicular activity. Two of the astronauts will go out into the cargo bay and try out various pieces of equipment. They'll try to determine how well their EVA suits operate, what is called the EMU suits. And that's something that had to be delayed the last time because of just a minor problem. Do you think they've got that problem solved this time?
I'm sure they have. In fact, as you know, there were a couple of minor 5-cent pieces left out of a regulator valve on one of the suits. The person who was responsible for that has been let go by the company involved. And they have been checked and thoroughly checked. So everyone has full confidence, Steve, in the suits this time. There should be no excuses.
How have you been able to get the weather from the various stations around the world as far as a possible abort is concerned? Does it look good weather-wise around the world?
It looks good everywhere except out at White Sands. They're concerned about that as an abort area. But, of course, you've got here, Steve. They can come into the landing strip here, and they will not hesitate to do so. They will land here. This is the prime backup site. And before, I think they would go into White Sands. So they're not concerned about that at all. And across the ocean at Senegal, everything is fine there at Dakar for an abort across the ocean if necessary.
All right, we're 4 minutes away from the launch. Can you describe to us at this point exactly what is happening in these last few minutes before the launch?
Well, at this time, all the systems are being checked and double-checked by the computer, Steve, and to make sure that everything is functioning as it should be. They're totally monitored by computers. They're monitored by the crew. They're monitored by the Mission Control Center. It's all a double-check system and double-check. And meanwhile, the situation here is it's just a cloudless sky. It's beautiful. It's the most beautiful day we've had in a long time. The crowd is large. There are a lot of people left over from the Easter weekend that are here. All the campers are here. The RVs are here. The people are out. And everybody is excited at this moment. The tenseness is here. You can cut the tenseness with a knife, to use an old trite phrase right now, as we come up on T-minus 3 minutes, and this count is still moving, Steve.
It's very interesting, the excitement that exists there at the press site, and I'm sure among all of the residents of that area. It never diminishes. Every flight brings that same anticipation of that huge roar that occurs at the beginning of the launch. This time, there's something different about the flight in the sense that we have a doctor aboard, a man there to kind of get an idea as to what's causing motion sickness. Is this to be routine, do you think? Is it necessary?
Yes, it seems that no matter which flight, Steve, that it happens with some of the astronauts. They don't know why. They want to study it, but they're not going to talk about it unless it indeed impacts the mission. They're going to keep it a personal illness personal. All right. We're still counting at 2 minutes and 15 seconds, Steve. Everything right on time.
In a few minutes now, we'll begin to see some movements at the rotating service structure. In fact, I believe now one major piece of equipment is making that movement at this time.
It's called the beanie cap. This is the last contact with the whole shuttle system itself. It's gone. It's on its own. It's on its batteries. It is totally self-contained at this point.
The main fuel tank, the big tank, is a little bit different color this time. Well, not really a different color. It's much lighter. They stopped painting it a couple of flights back, and it has a kind of muddy brown color as opposed to the bright white of the shuttle. This is an NBC News coverage of the flight of the Shuttle Challenger. This is Steve Porter, NBC News, as the countdown clock moves steadily toward the maiden flight of the Challenger space shuttle, launched now less than 90 seconds away. The weather at Cape Canaveral for launch is perfect. Watching the pad and listening to the countdown at the Cape is Jay Barbree. Jay, it's looking good.
It's been a long wait, Steve, 2.5 months, but finally it appears the country's second space shuttle is ready for its maiden flight. Leaks in all 3 of its main engines have been repaired, and trash and contaminants have been cleaned from its cargo bay. We are ready. We're in the final minute of the countdown. Hugh Harris is in launch control, and he will take us to liftoff. Let's pick up Hugh.
Under the orbiter's engines have been armed. These devices are used to ensure any hydrogen flowing through the engines prior to engine ignition does not accumulate. T-minus 40 seconds and counting. We're just seconds away from switching command of the countdown to the onboard computers. T-minus 30 seconds and counting.
Sequence start.
We are go for auto sequence start. The hydraulic power units on the SRBs have started. T-minus 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. We'll go for main engine ignition. 7, 6. We have main engine ignition. 4, 3.
There's ignition of Challenger's main engines, and its launch pad is now covered with a cloud of fire and steam. All three engines appear to be burning well, and Challenger is off. The solid boosters are taking it into space. It's a beautiful sight. Challenger is going straight up. It's off on its maiden flight, right on time. You can hear the roar coming toward us now. Here comes the roaring coming up as it begins to arc over and move out across the Atlantic. It's a beautiful launch right through a cloudless sky. So good. Challenger's still climbing straight up. It's out over the Atlantic Ocean right now on a beautiful flight path. Everything going smooth, and you can hear the roar begin to fade out over the ocean. In the background, you can hear the astronauts themselves and mission control. Still going beautifully. Everything right on time.
Main engine throttle is going back to 104%. Challenger is go at throttle up. Challenger, you're go at throttle up. Roger, go at throttle up.
Everything is go. That's the voice of Jack Riley in Mission Control. Everything is right on schedule, Steve.
Jay Barbree at the Cape, and this is NBC News coverage of the flight of the Space Shuttle Challenger.
Old Russia was fast disappearing. Palaces, churches, icons, and countless treasures were being destroyed by decades of neglect until now. The March issue of Smithsonian Magazine reveals how...
2.5 months for this, you might be slightly depressed.
15 miles, downrange 14 miles.
She's still clear as a bell, as if she were a gull that you've just seen take off here. In one of the clearest skies we've ever seen at the
Velocity
Cape.
5,100 feet per second. 20 miles in altitude, downrange 22 nautical miles. Standing by for solid rocket booster separation.
Standing by for SEP.
SRB-7 was that something?
They said they were...
Awful lot of crud on the windows at SRB-7, Dick. Roger, we copy that.
A lot of the material on the window, I believe he said.
Performance was nominal.
She's flying alone on the mains now.
6,000 feet per second, altitude 31 miles. Challenger's 46 miles downrange.
With the naked eye, we can see...
Challenger, you have 2-engine tail capability. 2-engine tail. Challenger now capable of a transatlantic abort to Dakar Airport on Africa's west coast if one main engine fails.
Still a dot in the sky, still visible to the naked eye. Not an eye here at the Cape has left you either.
Velocity 6,800 feet per second, altitude 39 miles. Challenger 70 miles downrange.
We're a little more than 3 minutes into the flight.
104%. Challengers go at 3 minutes 15 seconds. Flight Director Jay Green taking a status check at all positions prior to Challenger reaching negative return point.
It's about 15 seconds from now. She can't come back here. She'd have to get to Africa. But nothing to indicate.
7,800 feet per second.
Nothing to indicate that there's anything wrong.
Miles altitude.
Reaching
Challenger,
over.
your negative return. That's negative return. Challenger no longer able to return to the Kennedy Space Center.
The next stop.
Challenger is 127 miles downrange at an altitude of 50 nautical miles, velocity 8,700 feet per second.
Next stop would have to be Dakar in Senegal, in Western Africa.
There's a little 11,000-foot strip there. And a few NASA people, too. And a couple of medical kits.
4 minutes, 25 seconds elapsed. Velocity 9,500 feet per second. Altitude's 53.5 miles, 165 miles downrange. Challenger still go, all systems. All three main engines still at 104%.
The engines have left no doubt.
10,400 feet per second. Altitude 55 miles, downrange 196 nautical miles.
They're doing their work. Modified, changed.
Standing by for press to MECO.
Challenger, press to MECO. Press to MECO, normal slow.
That press to main engine cutoff call tells spacecraft commander Paul Weitz that Challenger can now continue uphill if one main engine fails.
They go on to the MECO or main engine cutoff point. Nothing has gone wrong. The best thing would be to get into some form of orbit. It doesn't really matter what.
Dr. Jay Green polling all positions. All controllers reporting everything looks great. 5 minutes, 40 seconds.
Back here at the Cape, a mushroom cloud of that white smoke.
Challenger, you have single engine TAL capability. Single engine TAL.
Challenger now capable of reaching Dakar Airport if two main engines fail. Velocity 13,900 feet per second. Altitude's 58 nautical miles. Downrange 321 nautical miles.
The column of white is perturbed up there in that wind shear.
Main engine cutoff computed for 8 minutes, 20 seconds.
A couple of minutes more to ride. But you can see clearly here.
15,000 feet per second. Altitude's 58 nautical miles. Downrange 364 nautical miles.
As she speeds on, that she did go through some perturbation of the atmosphere up there.
Elapsed time.
The ships 200 miles out are beginning to look for the solid rockets coming down on their parachutes. They had to chase a couple of vessels out of that impact area.
Up to 17,000 feet per second. Still at 58 nautical miles. Challenger 433 nautical miles downrange.
As the voice of Jack Riley in Houston tells us where she is, we no longer can see her.
Time.
Challenger, your single engine press to MECO. Single engine press, thank you.
That call tells the crew to press on even if two main engines shut down early.
All of the ifs.
Velocity nearing 20,000 feet per second.
Another 5,000 feet per second she'll have
29 miles downrange at an altitude of 58.1 nautical miles. Main engine cutoff still computed for 8 minutes, 20 seconds.
The pole of smoke over launch pad is 39A. The damage assessment teams will be
23,000 feet per second. Altitude's 58.5 miles. Downrange 629 nautical miles. 8 minutes.
Master alarm, cabin atmosphere light, Houston. We copy.
Cabin atmosphere, master alarm.
These things sometimes.
25,000 feet per second.
MECO. We got a MECO.
Main engine cutoff.
Roger, we copy, and no problem with your cabin atmosphere.
We're going to say they happen sometimes, and the alarms go off, but they don't really mean anything.
Nominal MECO.
In a few minutes, they'll separate from the tank.
Roger.
A few seconds.
Houston confirms external tank separation.
And now a couple more burns with the OMS systems, and they'll be in the orbit that they're looking for, 176 miles around the Earth. Yet tonight, much work to be done, however, because they must launch that tracking and data relay satellite. They must do many other things before they sleep. They have waited 2.5 months for these 9 minutes, 10 seconds, however, and they probably won't be ready to sleep even when the big job comes later tonight. So we have seen the successful maiden launch of the second space vehicle this country has managed to build, the Challenger. Challenger is meeting the challenge set by Columbia on this, the voyage of Shuttle 6. For Judy Muller in Houston, Texas, I'm Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
CBS News, I'm Douglas Edwards.
7, 6, we have main engine ignition. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. Liftoff of the Orbiter Challenger, the 6th flight of the Space Shuttle.
Voice of Mission Control. About half an hour ago, as the maiden voyage of the Space Shuttle Challenger began, a mission in which all appears to be going well.
This is Reed Collins at the Kennedy Space Center. It was on time, if you don't count 2.5 months of waiting for the engine troubleshooting. But when it came time for those engines to fire today, they ate hydrogen and oxygen like it was the elixir of life. And they lofted White's, Bobco, Peterson, and Musgrave into a blue Florida sky on a column of solid white smoke. From all data, the ascent was nominal, even through some rough winds at 42,000 feet. And now they are in space, no winds at all, just the Earth sliding beneath them at 17,000 miles an hour. America's second spaceship and 4 men in orbit. Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
Last, it appears the Challenger has put its troubled past behind it. It's 2.5 months late, but it's finally flying. The crew is quiet, allowing just a short burst of exuberance a couple of minutes ago, expressing its delight at the launch.
We take a consensus here. Dick, we recommend this hardly for everybody. That sounds like a familiar call.
It's the quietest launch in memory. Surprising, perhaps, that a craft that had so many problems on the ground is doing so well in space, at least so far. No problems are reported, though, as America's newest space shuttle flies into orbit. The astronauts reported something clinging to the windshield around the time of the separation of those 2 side boosters. Nobody on the ground knows exactly what it is. The crew just called it crud and apparently dismissed it. No problem. Challenger has fired its engines for an orbital maneuver now. It sounds like it's slightly off, but reportedly or apparently it's no big problem. Nothing to threaten the most important objective of this mission, the satellite deployment scheduled tonight. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
Why did they schedule the space shuttle launch for 1:30 in the afternoon this time? Well, they didn't, actually. Not at first, anyway. They planned to launch the Challenger on January 20th at 9 o'clock in the morning. But they ran into some fuel leak problems and had to postpone the launch several times. And something happened on the 20th of March that meant that they could not launch in the morning anymore. What happened was that highly predictable phenomenon called the vernal equinox. The sun, in effect, crossed the equator, meaning that the angle of the sun's rays would be quite different now. And the angle of the sun's rays off the rocket stage that's going to propel a communication satellite to a high orbit after the astronauts release it from the Challenger's cargo bay is an important consideration. They don't want the payload to be exposed to the cold shadows of space for more than 30 minutes during that 6-hour transfer period. The rocket, you see, has an electronic star scanner that serves as its navigation guide. That scanner locks onto certain stars, but the ones that were supposed to lock onto are too dim now that the sun has crossed the equator, dim in comparison with the spring sun. So they had to select some other stars to lock onto. That is the sort of problem you feed into a computer. What, oh computer, is the ideal time for a launch to lock onto the new stars? The answer came back 1:30 in the afternoon, Eastern Standard Time. However, that raises some new problems. Because the launch is so much later in the day, it means that it is evening in Senegal, in northwest Africa. If the Challenger were to lose 2 of its 3 main engines 4 or 5 minutes after launch, the flight plan calls for the astronauts to glide across the Atlantic and put down at an emergency runway at Dakar, Senegal. But they would need daylight conditions for that. So to meet that requirement, they have to lift off from Cape Canaveral no later than 2 p.m. In other words, the scheduled time is 1:30, and if for any reason there should be a slip of 30 minutes, they'd have to scrub the launch for the day. And now you know why. By the way, the spaceship Challenger was not supposed to fly at all. It was originally built as a test model for structural tests. But as we say, there is a cause, there is a reason for everything. NASA found out that it would be $90 to $100 million cheaper to use the test model for the flight than to build a different spacecraft from scratch. So they're doing it to save money. And bear in mind that while it is true that all effects have causes, it is also true that some effects become causes, too. And now this.
Crew confirming the successful opening of the shuttle's cargo bay doors just moments ago. If those doors had not been opened, heat would have built up inside the craft, and the astronauts would have been forced to abort the mission. As it is, the crew of 4 can now look forward to their main task, the launch from that cargo bay of the largest communications satellite in the world. That deployment is scheduled for later tonight, which means the astronauts have many miles to go before they sleep, sometime around 2:45 a.m. The TDRS satellite is the first of 3 designed to set up a communications network in space, a network that will eventually replace the current ground tracking system. With the current system, the astronauts can communicate for only 15% of the time with the Earth. With a TDRS system, that figure goes up to 85%. Judy Muller, CBS News, the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Challenger overcame 2.5 months of problems and delays and lifted off from its launch pad at Kennedy Space Center right on time today. The 5-day maiden voyage has begun. Live from Houston's Johnson Space Center, KTRH's Doug Miller has this report.
Well, the maiden voyage is 2.5 months late, but she's finally flying. The Space Shuttle Challenger, at long last, is now in orbit, a perfect 154 nautical mile orbit. The payload bay doors have now been opened. They're a little bit behind schedule on board Challenger, nothing serious though. There are a few glitches reported, things like what they call a secondary gimbal failure, in other words, a control failure on an OMS pod, those little maneuvering engines, those big maneuvering engines, the back of Challenger, on a secondary system, reportedly has gone out. No big problem there, though. That is a secondary system. So at this point, there's not much to do on board the Space Shuttle Challenger except to look out and do a little sightseeing.
It's a nice sunny day on the West Coast today. A little bit windy, but sunny.
Windy but sunny. Those winds that they've been looking down on forced the change in the abort landing site from the White Sands Space Center, where they've had some very high winds. That's they're looking down on at California and New Mexico just a couple of minutes ago. But again, no big problems reported on board the Space Shuttle Challenger. All things in readiness right now. Everything's going just fine for the deployment of that satellite, the most important part of the mission, scheduled for later tonight. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
Houston, thank you for that. It's 3 o'clock.
CBS News, I'm Marlene Sanders. The Space Shuttle Challenger continues to wing its way through space, carrying with it the world's largest communications satellite. The 2 million-mile trip began on schedule earlier this afternoon. Now, however, there are some problems with the insulation, according to Commander Paul Weitz.
2 panels of that insulation that's on the top part of the home, they look to be, I would guess, 1 inch thick. They're peeled back from the outboard sides. The outboard edges have come loose and they're peeled back some, and just to confirm it, the entire top portion of the thing is white, and it looks like it's attached to a pink layer, and the pink layer is the part that goes next to the vehicle.
Television will take a closer look at the problem when the shuttle next passes over Florida. More news after this.
Our launch was perfect. The payload bay doors have opened just fine, but once the doors were open, the 4-man crew of Challenger noticed something unusual. They looked back to the OMS pods, those flared shells above the shuttle's engines, and they saw something sticking out. 2 things, in fact. They think those objects are pieces of insulation. A new blanket-like material has replaced about 300 tiles on top of this orbiter. It's possible that a couple of pieces of that blanket-like material have peeled back, and Story Musgrave noticed something else.
And also, something I don't remember hearing about before was, about 1.5 feet or so forward from the leading edge of the vertical fin, right in close to it, within 6 or 8 inches of it. It looks like we've built up some ice there, and it's a little tree-appearing thing of ice space that I guess is 6, 7, 8 inches high. And we'll show you that on the TV, too, if it's still there.
Well, NASA's not especially worried about this possible insulation problem. Nonetheless, an unscheduled TV show, just like the one mentioned by Musgrave a second ago, has been added. About 35 minutes from now is when it's scheduled to begin. It'll take a first look, the TV debut of the Challenger in orbit. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
CBS News, I'm Douglas Edwards. The Space Shuttle Challenger soared flawlessly into orbit this afternoon. The $1.25 billion ship carries 4 astronauts who are to deploy the world's largest communication satellite and execute the first American spacewalk in nearly a decade. 2 hours into the flight, Flight Commander P.J. Whites reported trouble. Thermal insulation apparently peeling away from one of the 2 rear maneuvering engines. The voice of Mission Control.
Commander P.J. Whites has now determined that the objects sticking out of the Ohms pods appear to be tiles, pieces of insulation. He also reported ice near the vertical fin, a tree of ice 6 to 7 inches high.
No immediate indication whether the loose panels or tiles could affect the thermal integrity of the shuttle during the extreme heat of re-entry at the end of the Challenger flight. Now this.
Important advantages the Challenger has over the old Columbia is that about 300 of those troublesome tiles on top of the old craft have been replaced in this new one with a blanket-like material. It's an insulation. And just as the tiles caused worries on Columbia, that new blanket material is running into some snafus on Challenger. Apparently, 2 pieces of that insulation have partially peeled off of the shuttle above its big maneuvering engines. Now, a similar problem was reported earlier on the Challenger, on the Columbia, that is. Challenger made its television debut a few minutes ago, beaming back unscheduled pictures of that insulation. No word yet on whether it will hurt the Challenger on its way back. But when tiles fell off of an area nearby on earlier missions on Columbia, there was no problem during re-entry. We should get some word a few minutes from now from NASA on whether or not that will affect the re-entry. White Sands Missile Range confirms that it can now communicate with that satellite in the shuttle's cargo bay. That's the satellite to be deployed in space about 6.5 hours from now. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
CBS News, I'm Dallas Townsend. Today's launch was flawless, and so far only one possible difficulty has cropped up in the flight of the Space Shuttle Challenger. The trouble involves thermal installation on one of the rear maneuvering engines. But NASA spokeswoman Weta Tucker at Cape Canaveral says it doesn't seem to be serious.
It appears that the insulation blanket is peeled up in the corners in 2 spots. But NASA officials said it doesn't appear to be any significant damage to the insulation because upon re-entry, that's a relatively low heat area that can withstand temperatures of about 600 to 700 degrees.
Late this evening, if all continues to go well, the astronauts will launch a 2.5-ton communication satellite from Challenger's cargo bay. Now this message.
Since Columbia had trouble with its tiles, Challenger is having problems with its insulation. The 4 astronauts who blasted off at 12:30 this afternoon opened their payload bay doors early this afternoon. They glanced to the rear of their spacecraft and they noticed that 2 pieces of a blanket-like insulation material were apparently partially ripped away. Those rips are just above the big engines at the rear of the Challenger.
And they appear to be about 6 to 8 inches long, John, and it looks to me like it's a width of insulation. Probably, it's hard to tell from this perspective, but maybe 6 to 8 inches wide that have been peeled up from the outboard edge.
It turns out that that is not that new insulation material the astronauts thought it was, that insulation material flying for the first time on Challenger. Instead, it's a material in a different place, just like one used on Columbia, and it's in a place that's exposed to comparatively low temperatures during re-entry. So right now, NASA is not worried. It's no big problem in their minds. And right now, the Challenger, they say, is on schedule for the launch of that tracking satellite later tonight. Reporting live from the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
This is the
world tonight. Good evening. I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. There have been a lot of mechanical detours along the way, but the Space Shuttle Challenger finally blasted into orbit today, and it was beautiful to see. Reed Collins was at the Kennedy Space Center to watch it.
We should have ignition. We have it now. We have ignition. We're coming down to T0, and we should have liftoff. We see all of the solids, and we have movement. We have movement, and she's clearing the towers. Seconds into the flight, and we're being shaken by the force of it here. Do we hear anything from Mission Control?
Altitude 3.5 miles, downrange 2 miles. The throttle's going back to 104%. Challenger is go at throttle up. Roger, go at throttle.
She's still clear as a bell, as if she were a gull that you've just seen take off here. In one of the clearest skies we've ever seen at the Cape.
5,100 feet per second. 20 miles in altitude, downrange 22 nautical miles.
This is Judy Muller, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center, Houston. The Space Shuttle Columbia, after a flawless launch, developed what looked like a potential problem a couple of hours later. Two panels of thermal insulation had apparently begun peeling away from one of the two rear maneuvering engines. The crew beamed back television pictures as mission specialist Donald Peterson described the two panels involved.
Appear to be about 6 to 8 inches long, John. Like it's a width of insulation. Probably, it's hard to tell from this perspective, but maybe 6 to 8 inches wide that have been peeled up from the outboard edge.
NASA officials now say they do not expect those loose blankets to adversely affect the shuttle during the extreme heat of re-entry. Judy Miller, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Mutual News. The Space Shuttle Challenger and her 4-man crew have begun their first night in orbit, and Mutual's Jim Slade at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida reports their first big test comes 3 hours from now.
The big event for the crewmen aboard is the launch from the cargo bay tonight of a 5,000-pound satellite, the Tracking and Data Relay Satellite, one of 3 which will eventually ride in orbit. The machine, to be operated by NASA, will relay signals from satellites to lower orbit, including the shuttle, eliminating the long pauses in communications which now occur when the spacecraft are between receiving stations.
Mutual Jim Slade at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where Challenger roared off into space 7 hours ago.
Waiting for the word from the Johnson Space Center. We may be out of touch for just a short time during the deployment of this satellite. Right now they're over Ascension Island, and they may lose contact with Ascension during this period. NASA is hoping to keep in touch with the shuttle channel so that it can hear whether the satellite fires fast. We may lose contact with them for about 20 seconds.
And this is, of course, exactly the kind of problem that the satellite itself is supposed to avoid.
Exactly. It's ironic. We may be out of touch with this satellite. It's supposed to keep us in touch at all times with the other satellites flying around. You can hear a little bit of crackling in the background of the radios, because what that means is that they're starting to lose touch with the Challenger right now. They're on the edge of the coming down to 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. Should be deployed right now. But we're getting no word from the shuttle itself.
Nor from Mission Audio, Mission Control.
That crackling indicates they're trying to make contact with the Challenger.
Everyone is to pay close attention to this because we may never hear it again.
That's right.
Mission launch time is 10 hours, 2.5 minutes. Just at the tail end of that pass over Ascension, when in fact the mission or the communications model indicated we should have had LOS. We were still receiving data, and the payloads officer, J.J. Conwell, and the satellite tracking facility at Sunnyvale verified payload deployment on time.
So the payload is out right now. That big communication satellite has been fired out of the back of the Space Shuttle Challenger. This is just a spring-powered firing. Big springs just launched it out at an angle out of the back of the Space Shuttle. A new, heavier satellite like this, it weighs 2.5 tons. It'll need a much heavier booster to boost it out of there, and they've got one. They call it the inertial upper stage. It's a 2-stage booster. Imagine that. We've got a spacecraft up there that is launching a 2-stage rocket out of the back of it. The first stage can kick out 45,600 pounds of thrust. The second stage, 18,500 pounds of thrust. And about 54 minutes from now, if everything goes according to plan, that initial booster will fire for about 141 seconds. And about 5 hours, 14 minutes later, about 6 hours from now, in other words, the second stage is going to fire up and kick it up into the geosynchronous orbit.
Do they know yet when that satellite will be operational?
That'll be a couple of months away right now. They still have quite a few tests on it, and actually it won't do very much good until we get the second satellite up, which is going to be on the next shuttle mission. So we're talking about in June, whenever that's the earliest at which they can have it operational. They don't consider it operational until they get that spare in the air.
At this point, though, it seems that they've deployed it as per plans.
Looks as though it's flying, although we haven't got any confirmation from this unusually quiet crew on board the Space Shuttle Challenger.
And Doug Miller will be here with us, and we will check back as soon as we find out whether that satellite is indeed been deployed as it was supposed to have been. Thank you, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
Hydrazine reaction control jets on board the IUS will be commanded as part of the vehicle's pre-programmed sequence. In about 12 minutes after the separation from the orbiter, the IUS reaction control jets will command the first thermal roll maneuver intended to keep the TDRS temperatures within limits. And we should receive verification of some of those events from satellite control facility at Sunnyvale. Again, there are no detailed or dedicated IUS or TDRS displays here in Mission Control in Houston, and the bulk of data we receive on those systems is what is relayed to us from those payload operations centers at those appropriate locations. We're about 5 minutes away from acquisition of signal through Indian Ocean Station. Mission elapsed time 10 hours, 9 minutes. Mission Control, Houston.
In a few seconds, we should find out from the astronauts whether or not the satellite actually has the fluid. If it has the fluid, and it's almost certainly has, it should be flying over the spacecraft, traveling at a speed of about 1/10 of a foot per second, very slow, creeping above their heads. We should be getting the word from the astronauts a couple of seconds from now. Not quite a good signal, though. We're expecting it to be a bit weak. Something this satellite may change in the future.
Dial-a-shuttle
About a minute away from LOS. Good luck with the burn. We'll see you up at Guam at 10:39.
Our contribution is $3 or more.
Kill cable filled on time. Thank you.
NSI will send you a sample issue of Fixed-Flow magazine. Send your contribution name and address to NSI, Suite 203W, 600 Maryland Avenue, Southwest, Washington, D.C., 20024. Thank you. Keep listening, and we're approximately 17 minutes into the deployment phase.
Shuttle Mission Control, next major event we're expecting here now is in about 2.5 minutes from now, occurring in about 19 minutes after. Yeah, we're still on time. We copy. See you in about 20 minutes. Shuttle Mission Control to continue. The next milestone coming up is just under 2 minutes away when we're going to have another ohms burn, 40 foot per second burn of the orbital maneuvering system, intended to separate the Challenger from the payload and get it out of the way as the IUS sets itself up for its first burn, which occurs 55 minutes after deployment. By now, the IUS hydrogen reaction control system jets have been commanded as part of that vehicle's software program. We are 19 minutes from deployment, and the IUS jets will have commanded the first thermal roll, intended to keep the TDRS temperatures within its limits. That roll would be stopped and reversed by this time. That event would have occurred 18 minutes after deployment. That ohms burn is going to occur in the blind here. It occurs in about 20 seconds, and we won't acquire signal from the vehicle again until 18 minutes from now.
Stand by for burn. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Mission lapse time is 10 hours, 22 minutes. This is Shuttle Mission Control.
Well, the Space Shuttle Challenger should be maneuvering away at present from the TDRS, or Tracking and Data Relay satellite, which launched approximately 20 minutes ago.
CBS News, I'm Jay Jones. Near the end of a long day, began on Cape Canaveral and is winding up in space, the four-man crew of the Shuttle Challenger has delivered an important piece of cargo, launching the biggest and most sophisticated communications satellite yet built. We have a report from Reed Collins at the Cape. The Challenger has accomplished its major task and has flung a tracking and relay satellite from its payload bay. A 5,000-pound satellite will be driven eventually into a synchronous orbit above the equator, where it will become part of a spaceborne communications network, eliminating the several ground tracking stations now in operation.
That was a good deploy, John. That sounded great.
Deploying the satellite was the major item of this day, once the Challenger had left the Cape and occupied the four-man crew for several hours. With the satellite safely out of the cargo bay, the Challenger crew will get an evening meal and finally some sleep. Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
This first mission continues to be successful. The shuttle's four-man crew launched the world's largest communication satellite late Monday night. 2.5 ton bird is the first of 3. Hope to improve shuttle communication in the future.
France orders nearly 50 Russians out of the country for spying. The Space Shuttle Challenger is okay, but a satellite it launched has trouble. Good morning. This is Doug Poling with the World News Roundup. Astronauts. At Cape Canaveral, Reed Collins has a report.
The tracking and data satellite sprung from the cargo bay of Challenger last night is in trouble. It happened as the second stage of the rocket that guides it, the IUS, was firing, and all communication was lost.
The TDRS-IUS combination is most likely tumbling. Anomaly teams are at work to produce a plan to attempt to recover the spacecraft.
The TDRS is one of 3 satellites NASA had hoped to have in stationary orbit by next year to increase communications with spacecraft and satellites in space and to eliminate a lot of expensive ground tracking stations and jobs. For this, NASA was committed to spend $2.5 billion over the next 10 years. Reed Collins, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
They're trying desperately to save that multi-million-dollar satellite launched just last night from the Space Shuttle Challenger. Here to update us is KTRH's Wayne Dolcefino, live at Johnson Space Center.
Where in the heavens is the 2.5-ton communication satellite and its rocket booster apparently still connected? For 6.5 hours, the satellite had been fine, but as the rockets to fire TDRS into its 180-mile high orbit were to fire, communications were lost, and to make matters worse, Mission Controller Steve Nesbitt says it may be impossible to command the ship to stop tumbling now because the rocket may be out of batteries. The Challenger crew has slept through the whole thing. They'll probably get the bad news when they wake up at 10 a.m. In the meantime, Anomaly teams from TRW, which owns the communication satellite, and the folks at Sunnyvale, California, and at White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, who were supposed to be tracking it, are trying desperately to figure out a way to get TDRS back, but it's not looking good. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
Major objectives of this mission were the tracking and data relay satellite to be launched to geosynchronous orbit and an extravehicular activity, a spacewalk. That is still coming up. The spacewalk will occur on Thursday afternoon. They're going to be trying out their new spacesuits. They're going to be trying out the use of tools. They have several different designs for tools, and they will see what designs work best in the weightless system space. They are going to try out a slide wire arrangement they can attach themselves to for safely maneuvering fore and aft in the payload bay area. The payload bay is about roughly the size of a boxcar. Pretty good size. And it's a lot emptier now that they have released the tracking and data relay satellite. That is the largest telecommunications satellite that has been launched to date. You're listening to Dial-a-Shuttle, and we thank you very much for calling. Not much is going on right now with the astronauts sleeping for another 2 hours. The only significant news at this point is the unfortunate failure of the IUS booster rocket in launching the TDRS tracking and data relay satellite to geosynchronous orbit. Unfortunately, that satellite is now out of control and out of reach, just, lost. And they've only recently had to come to grips with that fact. The astronauts are not aware of it yet. They are asleep and will be awakened in a little less than 2 hours from now.
From ABC News, I'm Joe Templeton. When the astronauts aboard the Challenger wake up shortly, they'll be told by NASA that there's a problem with the big communications satellite released from the shuttle during the night and sent into orbit. There's no problem with the shuttle. It's in orbit with all systems reportedly working normally. But the communications satellite in a higher orbit is apparently in trouble. Here's ABC's Irv Chapman at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
The communications satellite appears to be tumbling end over end 22,000 miles above the Earth, Joe, still attached to the rocket that gave it the final boost after leaving Challenger hours earlier. Technicians tried to order a correction until the rocket's short-lived batteries gave out and they lost contact with it. We're still waiting for word on what can be and is being done to stabilize the satellite itself, which was supposed to be a key tracking and radio link with future shuttles and space satellites. The Challenger did its job last night just fine in getting the satellite up and away. The 4 astronauts have been sleeping through all the subsequent trouble. Joe?
ABC's Irv Chapman in Houston. When the astronauts do wake up, they'll have a light schedule today dealing mostly with medical and scientific experiments. I'll have more after this.
Continuing with Ben Baldwin on the Talk of Houston right after CBS News. It's 9 o'clock at KTRH.
CBS News. This is Judy Muller reporting from the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Mission Control now says all is not lost, apparently, with that communication satellite that earlier was said to be tumbling through space with its ailing rocket attached.
It's our understanding that the tracking data relay satellite, some control has been regained over that. There is preliminary indication that they did get a separation on it after it was believed that it was no longer possible to command that separation because the IUS batteries had expired. But apparently there has been a separation. The TDRS appears to be stable, and we are told that the solar panels are being unfolded.
Last night, the TDRS satellite was launched from the cargo bay of the shuttle Challenger. That launch went very smoothly. The problem developed this morning when the IUS rocket attached to the 2.5-ton satellite reportedly failed to blast it into a higher orbit. NASA believed that the TDRS would be unable to separate from the rocket because the system was not taking commands. NASA tells us now that the satellite did not make the higher so-called stationary orbit required for it to function as part of a 3-satellite communication system. But the TDRS is in a higher orbit than the one Challenger left it in, leading NASA officials to speculate that the rocket did not completely malfunction. More news after this.